Hey folks, so Clive Thompson here. I am a medium writer, and I'm here to talk today about rewilding your attention. So yeah, that's a subject that I kind of hit upon, I guess about 2 years ago, and I've been blogging a bit about it at Medium. And I wanted to chat a little bit about kind of some of the stuff that I've discovered and what it means for me and my writing, what it might mean for you and your writing. So when I say rewilding your attention, I mean, the TLDR is basically how to stop spending so much time that I was spending staring at the sort of social media feeds that were pushing stuff algorithmically at me. How to pay less attention to the big kind of viral cascades of the day, and find ways to cultivate kind of more offbeat, more unusual, more idiosyncratic stuff for me to look at. So I'm going to talk about that. Obviously, I'm going to go for about maybe 15 minutes. Throw any questions or comments or anything in the in the chat, and then for the last 10-15 minutes, we can sort of chat with what you guys have raised. So the phrase "rewilding your attention" is great. I love it. I can praise it because I didn't come up with it. I actually discovered it online in kind of a meta or fractal way. It's an example of talking about rewilding your attention. Was that I was sort of just poking through a bunch of like small personal blogs, and I discovered one of them had linked to this amazing tweet thread by Tom Critchlow. And he is a designer, an IT consultant, and a blogger himself. And he was sort of talking about, I guess he was talking about having read bloggers that he knew and people that write online, and he was sort of describing the pressure to sort of hit upon all the viral subjects of the day so that you can get some of that viral audience yourself. He sort of felt that pressure himself. He'd seen other writers that had that pressure, where they thought, well, if I just sort of wrote about all the stuff that everyone else is writing about, then maybe I'd get some of those eyeballs, I'd get some of that audience. And he said, the problem with that is that you wind up, writing and thinking about the same subjects and often the same thoughts that everyone else is having. It's not a way to sort of to have a healthy and diverse imagination, healthy and diverse voice, a healthy and diverse attention span. And so he said, if you work at it, you can step away from that stuff. You can, as he said, you can rewild your attention. And I read that, and I just love that phrase because I'm a science writer, and so I knew a bunch about the phenomena of rewilding when it comes to the actual natural world, right? So, in the physical natural world, we've had a lot of problems in the last 100 years with monocropping, right? Where you plant 100 miles of just one crop. It's all wheat or it's all corn and nothing else. You drive through the fields and you see endless rows of just one type of crop, and it's a great way to get that crop really cheap. But it causes all sorts of problems to the ecosystem because when you plant just one crop, it tends to weaken the soil. It tends to disrupt, the natural habitat of pollinators, and so you wind up with a situation where it's a brittle ecosystem. One little bug or one invasive species can destroy a monocropped area. And so, in the world of nature, people have been trying for decades now to think about rewilding, which is to say, how to take an area that has been monocropped and plant a much more diverse array of flora and fauna so that it becomes much healthier and much more rugged and much more interesting to look at too, right? And so that idea of rewilding applied to your attention span, to the things that you look at and the things you write and think about, was really evocative for me. It's one of those metaphors that crystallized what I'd kind of been trying to do in my own life, because over the last 15 years of the social media explosion, I, like many people, have spent many hours staring at various feeds, whether that's for me the big one was Twitter, but also for other people it's TikTok or Instagram or whatever. And we all know by now the problem with these algorithmic feeds. They tend to sort of try and find things that are going a little viral and make them go way more viral by goosing them up in the algorithmic rankings, and that tends to be stuff that is really hotly emotional. It's really it makes you really angry, or it makes you really amused, or it makes you, really sad. It's always a hot emotion. That's kind of one problem with the social media algorithms. But the other one is really that there's a sort of, or I certainly found in my life, there's sort of a deadening sameness to it. Like I found that, because I was staring at the same things that everyone else was staring at, I wasn't really having any interesting new ideas. That I was having sort of a monocropping of the attention span, a monocropping of the mind. So 5 or 6 years ago, I started noticing this, and I decided I wanted to do something about it. I wanted to think of strategies I could, on a daily basis do that would, diversify my my diet, the stuff that I was looking at, the cultural diet, information diet, the things that I was looking at online, the things that I was reading and interacting with and viewing. And so I sort of came up with like a handful of strategies that work for me, that do this sort of rewilding, and it's been very pleasant. Like when I look over my medium writing over the last couple of years, a lot of the stuff I've written that I'm happiest with came about because I got the idea through some of these rewilding strategies. So I wanted to sort of talk about what some of those strategies are, and I'm actually I made some little cards here that I'll just throw up on screen here so we have something to look at. I'm going to share about 6 or 7 of these strategies, and then I'd love to hear what you guys do yourselves when you're trying to find stuff that's off the beaten path, that isn't part of these viral cascades. So throw up your own suggestions that we could talk about in the Q&A chat, or throw up any questions. So I'll talk about these strategies for the next 10 minutes or so, and then we'll go to what you guys are talking about. So the first big one is RSS, right? So this is something that has really diversified my attention because I've leaned heavily into it in the last 5 years. RSS, for people who don't know what it is, it's really just a technology for letting an RSS reader follow any site that you tell it to follow, and then just show you all the headlines. Here's all the stuff that these people posted in the last days, weeks, or whatnot. So I use one called Feedly. I'm going to mention some resources, by the way, as I talk. And if you want to small in one place, you could go to my clivethompson.medium.com, my Medium thread, because I've written about a lot of these in the past, and I'm actually going to put up a post later today or tomorrow summarizing all the sort of resources I talk about here. So the first one is I use Feedly, which is a fantastic RSS reader. There's a free version. I pay for the premium version, and basically you can just, if you find an interesting site, you throw it in there and it will start monitoring it for you. I have about like 400 sites that I follow right now, because I'm a science and technology nerd. There's a lot of science and technology stuff, but I also actively just try and find things that I think will drag me out of my intellectual ruts. So I have a bunch of stuff devoted to visual art. I have a bunch of stuff devoted to culture journals. I have things devoted to some of my obsessions. I'm a musician. There's a guitar back there. So I follow a bunch of like guitar pedal blogs. There's stuff about bicycling, because I'm into bicycling. There's a lot of environmental stuff, a lot of design things, and history and philosophy and whatnot. And so whenever I get the urge to I want to just spend, an hour zoning out, online, instead of going to, Mastodon or X or Instagram or whatever, I'll sort of say, well, let's just spend an hour looking through, all this stuff that is there now arranged and followed for me in Feedly. And it's like prospecting for gold. Like there's a lot of noise to the signal. Like I'll look at a lot of stuff and I'm like, God, it's not very interesting. But when you find the gold, it's really amazing. And it is stuff that is not moving at all on any of the social networks I look at. Like it's really interesting things. So a lot of essays I write on Medium come from things I've found I've been inspired by when I'm looking through this massive bunch of RSS feeds. So that's the first sort of thing that I use that has been really, really catalytic to sort of my attention span. And the next one is books. Good old-fashioned paper books or digital books. When I say books, what I really mean is nonfiction books, is what I'm specifically talking about here. So situations where some author has said, okay, I'm going to investigate this the subject matter. I'm going to go deep into it, and I'm going to research for 3.5, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, and come back with the absolute best stuff that I found. So for me, nonfiction books are remarkable media objects because they are sort of almost the highest noise to signal ratio you can get. Someone has done all this research, they found just the best stuff, and they brought you that. So I often, if I find my imagination or my attention getting a little stale, I'll just hit up a local bookstore or my library, and I'll just go to the sort of latest, newest nonfiction books and just kind of do a form of like intellectual speed dating. I'll pick one up and just look through the introduction and read a few pages, and if it doesn't grab me, I put it right back down again and just go to the next one. And inevitably, after a little while, I'll find some just absolutely remarkable books this way. Recently, I just discovered this amazing book called Embattled. The subtitle is "How Ancient Greek Myths Empower Us to Resist Tyranny" by Emily Katz-Anhalt. And it's literally all about her reading of ancient poetry, like the Iliad and the Odyssey of Homer, or the plays of Sophocles, Euripides, and what moral lessons they have for today. So this is not something that normally I would have hit upon if I was just looking through the viral trends on any social network, but it has been incredibly thought-provoking, and I'm probably going to write a blog post about it. So books are just an amazing way to decouple your attention from the stuff that's happening in the viral sphere. Another one that I use a lot of is discussion boards. So there are, whether it's subreddits on Reddit or whether it's just forums devoted to a hobby or something like that, being hosted on PHBBB. There's pretty much guaranteed anything you can think of, any subject you can think of, there's going to be a discussion board with people just nerding out at it. And so sometimes when I'm thinking about a subculture or a subject, or I read about it or I think about it, I'll just go, is there a forum on this, and what are people talking about? I'll hunt it down, and there will be, and I'll read it. And it's kind of an amazing way to expose yourself to a subculture or a subject matter, whether it's I don't know, deep sea diving, crocheting and knitting, model trains, a particular hobby, mine again, guitar pedals, because it's real people talking and having arguments about the subject matter, and that is really, really mind broadening. I find it's all these forums, they always cut cross identity too, because they bring people in from all around the world who might have very different views on things, but they are all obsessed with this particular subject, this particular anime subculture. So they're all sort of talking about it, and to me it's a really amazing mind broadening way of thinking about things. There is adjacent to the discussion of books, another thing that I find has been amazing for broadening my attention span and the things I look at are weird old books. And by that, I mean like stuff that's 18th century and 19th century. The fun thing about these books is that they're generally free to read because they've been scanned by Google Books, or they've been scanned by the Internet Archive or other places, sometimes by libraries or by museums, and they're you can find one and just start reading the whole thing and immerse yourself in often very, very different views of subject matter or whatnot, because it's by people that were living 150 years ago with very different concerns. So again, I just find them often mesmerizing and interesting to sort of poke around in old magazines. In fact, I do this often enough. I dive into these crazy old books often enough that I created, I'm a hobbyist programmer, so I created a little search engine just for looking for weird old books. It's called the Weird Old Book Finder. I wrote a blog post about it. If you just look for Weird Old Book Finder, you'll probably find it. And it's a really simple search engine, because all you do is type in a query, and it will go and find an old book that's been scanned Google Books, and return by random just one of those books to start reading right away. So it's kind of a way you'll type. The other day I typed in horses, and it found me this book on like horse maintenance and horse breeding from like 1859. It was just absolutely wild with these gorgeous illustrations. So a fun way to sort of broaden your mind and wild attention is by looking at old books. Similar to that are weird search engines. And by that, what I mean are sort of search engines outside the obvious ones that we know about, like the big ones are in Google and Bing and whatnot. But there's a lot of like custom made little search engines, and I've blogged some of these. So you'll find them if you look at my my Rewilding Your reading list of essays I've written, because I've written about these. But one of them that I hit upon a while ago that's really tripped is Marginalia, which is a search engine that focuses specifically on like text-heavy personal websites that have done everything they can to avoid search engine optimization. So they're really people who are don't go viral and don't want to go viral, and they're often writing about just incredibly interesting things. So that's a fun one that I've used. There's a great directory that I stumbled upon about a year ago. Some of you may have seen it. It's called the O directory, OOH.directory. And it's a guy who's literally trying to redo what Yahoo did back in the 1990s. Just a hand curated taxonomy of websites, and he focuses heavily on, again, personal websites, stuff people that are doing that's sort of idiosyncratic, driven by their writing about their lives or their jobs or their interests. And every once in a while, I'll just go to the front page of that directory, and it has a list of the most recently updated sites, and I'll just start randomly reading people's personal sites, and they're just inevitably really, really interesting. It's stuff that people issues are raising that have nothing to do with what's currently going viral. So weird search engines is another one I use a lot of. So the next strategy I'm going to use is it works for me really well, is poetry. So I'm a little unusual in my reading habits, and I don't read very many novels at all. I mostly just read nonfiction and tons of poetry. When I tell people that, they're like, well, I hate poetry because I can never figure out what it means. And I usually tell them, like, I have no idea what most of it means either. That's not why I'm reading it. I find what I really love reading poetry is that poets use language in really interesting and fresh ways. They don't sort of beat around the bush. They just go right for a really crazy metaphor and just slam it to the table. And I love exposing myself to a lot of that language, because it sort of breaks me out of almost my mental or rhetorical ruts, the sort of ways I have of using language. It shakes me up in a really interesting way. So that's a fun one. And there's tons and tons of poetry, like literally for free online. So it's an easy one. If I find myself, again, I've been like noodling around in social media and staring at the same trends everyone else is staring at, I'll just go and spend 15-20 minutes reading some poetry to freshen up my brain. Sometimes I'll do it before I start writing an essay too, because again, it's like just seeing really unusual, weird ways that people use language and can be fantastic. So that's another one. And the last one I'm going to mention here as a rewilding strategy. It's cropped up as I've talked about these other things, but it's very common in the things that I find most interesting is when I'm looking at personal blogs. Again, like websites that just everyday randos are writing their stuff about. And to me, this is really where like the real weird stuff on the internet often is. And when I say weird, I mean, obviously, as may be obvious by now, I tend to mean weird as really, really good, right? Like stuff that is eclectic, that is unexpected, that is very personal, that is or is very obsessed on a really interesting obsession. And so I've started like looking around for like networks of that actually collect together personal blogs, so I can sort of poke through them. One that I've been having fun with lately is just reading blogs at write.as, WRITE.as. It's essentially a blogging engine. It's like Medium in that regard, but it's people tend to do a lot of personal writing in it, and it is incredibly interesting. I'll start reading one person talking about their job, talking about vacation, talking about their hobby or their obsession, and they'll mention other people's blogs in the network, and I'll sort of go through it. It has this very kind of late 90s feel, web-ring feel of it. So those are basically some of the main techniques that I've been using to rewild my attention. Generally, I've found it's been very powerful. I mean, when I look at my writing on Medium, many of my favorite pieces came this way. Like just recently, I was looking through Feedly, and I was reading some articles about e-bikes, and again, it's like panning for gold. It takes work when you're doing these techniques. It's not it's not uncommon for me to read a lot of stuff and be, that's kind of boring. I just spent half an hour looking at stuff that really wasn't that interesting. And then suddenly you find something really, really great. That's actually a key part of rewilding, is that it takes much more work than just sitting back and being given stuff via algorithms, recommendation algorithms. Because the recommendation algorithms, I mean, the upside of them is that they're trying to find things that other people have been talking about. And if other people have been talking about it, it might have some emotional hook for me too. So, that stuff that's been engineered to, again, make me angry, make me amused, make me sad, make you feel something strongly. And it works. That stuff is really, the hit ratio on that stuff is really good. But again, I'm thinking the same thoughts everyone else is thinking. I'm looking at the same things everyone else is looking at. Whereas these other techniques, in our lives, they take a lot more work. It's more toll, but the rewards are really huge. Like I was sort of began this anecdote saying, I was looking at some cycling blogs because I'm a cyclist, and there was a stray mention in one of them that Denver had done a study of its e-bike program. They had decided a year ago, Denver had decided to subsidize e-bikes the way that the government subsidizes electric cars, hand out a coupon. And it had been so successful that in like the first 10 minutes, they handed out like several hundred of these vouchers, and they had to go back and hand out more. And when they looked at it a year later, after I think they issued like something like 4,000 of these vouchers, half of them to low-income families, they found that it had taken hundreds and thousands of driver miles off the road because people were using their e-bikes instead of riding their cars. So this is just like a stray mention of something that was on this personal cyclist blog. I wound up getting obsessed with it and writing a great essay that like produced a huge fun conversation, both on my Medium discussions and on Mastodon, the social media where I'm mostly active at. That's just one example of how this works out, kind of, I guess, in my everyday blogging. I mean, there's plenty of examples like that. When I think about it, another recent blog post I wrote that was a lot of fun, that did really, really well, was about cursing in code. So about how when coders are writing their software, often they will include curse words. Sometimes that might be a swear word that's one of the variables, or it might be a comment where they're like, I have no idea what's going on here. Someone please help me. Sometimes they're very funny. And a scientist had done like a study to try and look at the quality of code based on a sort of a standard metric where you try and figure out, is this code written really well or written really poorly? And they'd found that that the code that had cursing in it was slightly higher quality than code that didn't have cursing in it. I thought this was hilarious because I'm a hobbyist coder, and I'm often writing comments in my code about how baffled I am or how stupid I feel. I tend not to swear too much, but I do say, damn and heck and stuff like that. So I was amused by this, and I ended up, encountering that through, again, someone's, blogging through my RSS feed. I almost can't even remember where it was, but it was one of the things where I've been reading, and these code I was reading in a sort of a coding area I had in Feedly, and I hadn't really found anything very interesting. I was just about to give up, and I hit upon this write-up of this amazing study, and I read the study and wrote a essay for it on Medium, and it did really well. And again, I think it's because these are the types of things that I'm encountering that everyone else is not already talking about. And there's something fresh. I think people find that sometimes kind of nice and fresh, because they'll sort of open up Medium and they'll see like in the area where I'm writing about with technology, like endless pieces about AI, because that's the hot topic of today, and it's certainly worth talking about. But it can sound, you can wind up having just a whole bunch of stuff over and over again. It feels like endless AI pieces. So this is mostly what I have to say. I've kind of reached the end of what I wanted to talk about rewilding. There's a few questions here that I wanted to throw out. One was from Daniel. Actually, it's just a compliment. Daniel, thank you so much. You wrote a really nice note saying that he found this really fascinating. I appreciate it. It's certainly an interesting subject for me. I mean, I've spent my career, like I'm a technology writer, and for about 25 years now. And one of the main subjects that I write about is cognition. The way that we think and how technology affects the way we think. And so one of the things I started noticing kind of, I guess, early on in this, is that every time there was a new tool set that emerged, it would have an effect, an observable effect on the way that I think. And so when I started seeing the rise of social media feeds that were algorithmically sorted, that was when I first began to sort of feel the pull of them on my attention span. And it took me a while to be alarmed about it or unsettled by it. But eventually, by the time I realized, I was going to have to do almost like a mental intervention. I was going to have to find some techniques that would allow me to, break aside from those very monocropped subjects that you see on social media. So in one sense, writing about this is something I've spent 25 years thinking slowly about and coming to these conclusions. Now, there was another question here from, let's see, from Sophie Pascal. What's the name of the monitoring site again, please? Feedly.com, feddly.com. But truthfully, that's just one RSS reader, but there's actually quite a lot of them out there. And they all kind of generally do the same thing. They're all pretty good. So you could use that one. You could use any RSS reader kind of you want. Sometimes I think it's actually good to try a bunch of different ones, because they'll all have a slightly different style for the way that they monitor sites, and maybe a slightly different design. And it's useful to sort of try a few until you figure out which one most suits the way that you like to have it set up. I mean, I think Feedly works very well for me. There may be other ones that work really well for you. There's a question here from Sanjiv Das saying, do you take breaks to rewild? How long? What makes it work, if it does at all? Is it disconnecting or redirecting that makes a difference? Actually, that's a great question. And I would say that, yes, I take breaks. I actively, I guess the break is sometimes when I think I feel like I want to go stare at, at a social media feed for a while. That's when I'll go, well, wait a minute, why don't I just spend 15 minutes, half an hour reading through some other stuff? Any of these different strategies I've talked about, I try one of those. So it is active. Also, sometimes I think it's redirected procrastination, right? So I'm a writer, which means I procrastinate a lot. And so, what I'll do is, if I can feel myself wanting to procrastinate, and I feel like, well, I'm going to have to procrastinate because my brain is just not ready to write yet, or to do research or interviews, that's when I'll say, okay, well, at least I could make this kind of a productive or intellectually fruitful procrastination session, and let me go after some of these rewilding techniques. Again, whether it's RSS or reading old books, or, looking around for paper books and stuff. Also try and, get some lemonade from the lemon of my procrastination. Now, Daniel had another question here. Have you find a reliable news source anywhere online? Yeah, I mean, like every news source has, has its own things it's really good at and things it's really bad at. So I tend to rely on a fairly wide array of them. I mean, for daily news, I tend to rely on fairly large, newspapers that have large staffs that can actually do real reporting, whether that's the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, or a good city newspaper that's located, in the part of the country where or part of the world where the news is happening. And I'll read a bunch of different stories to sort of see how people are covering it in different ways, to be able to, try and get as many views on it as I can if I'm following it. That's with kind of, mainstream news. When it comes to like the sort of smaller, more niche subjects I look at, definitely, I feel like a lot of the new tech news sites, art news sites, culture sites I follow, they're reliable insofar as, by and large, I don't find them to be retracting stuff or writing things that are completely out of step with what everyone else is doing. That tends to be a signal that something a little awry is going on, when it is like, like so dramatically outside the the factual consensus. Sometimes that can be an incredibly powerful signal. Someone is on to a new set of facts that everyone else is ignoring. Absolutely. But by and large, I find that most of the sites I follow are pretty reliable, or if I'm following them, they're not reliable in a way that's sort of interesting for me to know about, I guess. It's a hard one to answer because it partly depends on what subject matter you're looking at. I'm looking mostly at science and technology. So there's a lot of fairly well-known and pretty reputable sources in that area. So we are at the end of the session. Thank you very much, all the folks who came and showed up. I really appreciate it. It's a super interesting subject for me. I'm going to publish later tonight or tomorrow a post on my my Medium feed, clivethompson.medium.com, just listing all the resources that I mentioned today, so they're all kind of in one place. I've written about them in the past, but it's good to have them all in one place right after I do this talk. So thank you again for coming. I really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of Medium Day.